Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, where we have seen a lot of territorial changes as Syriac Maps has uploaded for the first time since September. We also see that the Ukrainians have lost their very first Challenger 2 tank and much more as we go through the latest developments throughout today. So starting out in the Zaporizhia front, see that the Ukrainian forces have managed to advance within the village of Kamyanske, here to the western edge of the Zaporizhia front. They've managed to capture this territory here, which is not very inhabited, but they have been able to break through some Russian defenses to get to this point. So fighting continues here in this direction, although there has been essentially no advances by the Ukrainian forces all throughout August in this part. But we see now that they have started moving here again. At the same time, in the Robotyne area, we see that the Ukrainian forces have managed to advance in three directions. The first one is fully capturing 100% of Robotyne and fighting onwards to the defensive line of the Russian position south of the village. With this, the Ukrainian forces now have full control over the village and are threatening the Russian fortifications to the south of it. This would enable them to push onwards to Novopokivka, as we see here with the first main line of defense of the Russian forces. Appearing to the south of the village, the Ukrainian forces can now push onwards from multiple directions in the direction of Novopokivka, as well as the only fortifications being two minor ones to the south of Robotyne and a final one ahead of Ilchenkove. With this, the Ukrainians now have a very wide gap in which they can threaten the Russian positions all the way from Verbove and down south to Ilchenkove. So the Ukrainian forces are now in a position where they can attack the main line of defense and storm it with their main push. We also see that they've managed to advance here to the south of the area, where they've managed to extend the area of contact between Ukrainian positions and the anti-tank ditches. We also see that the Ukrainian forces managed to pass through the main line of defense, the anti-tank ditches with some infantry, as was geolocated by multiple sources, including Syriac Maps. And the source is, of course, when you click on it in the map, and the map is in the description down below. So I think a very important part of my channel is that my neutrality is supported by my transparency with what sources I use. Whenever you can and want to check the map changes, you can click on the map. The map link is down in the description, or you can just go straight to my Telegram, where I link all of the sources I use in all of my videos, so you can see for yourself which sources I use. And in relation to these advances and the inclusion of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian forces, we now see the Challenger 2s at the front line. And in this video here, we see the very first loss of a Ukrainian Challenger 2 tank. The reason we know this is a Challenger 2 tank is for two reasons. The first one is the circular entity we see on the ground here and in the picture here, which shows that the Challenger 2 has this, and it is the one that has this, and we see it in the picture of the burning tank. We also see the silencer on the rifle scope itself, and we also see the targeting system on top of the tank. So these three things indicate that this is a Challenger tank. We already see mainstream media, MSN, reporting on the loss of Challenger 2 tank. So now it is the very first Challenger 2 tank that has ever been lost in combat. It is against the Russian forces, and the irony of it all is that this Challenger 2 tank probably never even saw the Russian forces, as it looks like this was either hit by artillery, ATGM, or a drone. There's been no footage of the actual attack itself, but we're only seeing the aftermath. So if the Ukrainians did not upload this, we wouldn't even know of the first loss of the Challenger 2 tank. So now the British Ministry of Defense has to update their page where they claim it has been used on the British Army on operations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo and Iraq, and has never experienced a loss at the hands of the enemy. Now it has, as it has been used by Ukraine against Russia, and it has been lost. As for the Ukrainian advances here to the south of Robotyne, we see these multiple geolocated videos of Ukrainian forces advancing through the forest lines here through this forest here, as well as the patches right next to it, attacking the Russian trenches And then the duplicated footage is from Russian FPV drones, which hit these Ukrainian positions all across from the location right here, the intersection between the forest lines, and then we also see them concentrated here behind the Russian trenches south of Robotyne. Then we move on to the Uledar area, where here we see that the Ukrainian forces managed to advance and capture these settlements north of the village of Pavlivka, here to the south of Uledar. So the Ukrainian forces are now holding positions to the north and to the west of the village. If they plan on cutting off the supply line, they'll be able to cut off most of the supplies to the village and have Pavlivka in a semi-encirclement, operational encirclement, as they can directly target the road between Mikhailske and Pavlivka. They just need to push through the southern parts, but there's likely many minefields in the area, so it'll be difficult for them to push through in the area. After this, we move on to Marinka, where here the Russian forces have managed to advance 2 more streets. The final parts of Marinka is still under some Ukrainian possessions here in the western outskirts, but we see that the Russian forces are slowly advancing throughout the months. The fighting in Marinka has been ongoing since 2014, so the fighting ongoing and nearing its end is nearing one of the longest battles of the Ukraine war very soon. And I say very soon in comparison to the fact that it has been ongoing for over 9 years. Now it is closing in on the end, possibly the final half a year. Then we move on to the fighting by the south of Bakhmut in the direction of Klishchiivka. So it has been updated by Syriac maps that the Ukrainian forces have managed to capture further parts of Klishchiivka. The northern part still under Russian control, and the Russian forces have here in the northern part tried to push. Their goal would be to flank the Ukrainian positions here by the northern part of Klishchiivka. However, we have seen a previous former video of Russian forces, especially tanks, trying to push here in the northern part, which ended up with them getting hit by mines and Ukrainian artillery. So this is why the Ukrainians managed to push through in the first place, because the Russian forces used some of their available forces to try and counterattack, which failed and left them vulnerable for a few days, and as such the Ukrainians took advantage of that and pushed onwards, capturing most of Klishchiivka. So if the Russians do another such attempt and fail at that, they would likely lose the rest of Klishchiivka. However, if they succeed, they could push Ukraine fully out of the village. Is to the Siversk front, where here we see the Ukrainian forces managed to push the Russians back out of the outskirts of the village. The Russians still have a small foothold here, but the Ukrainians have managed to capture most of the road to the north of it. As for the Serebrenki forest area, the Russian forces have managed to advance slightly. This was also reported by Deep State Map, but I was waiting for the Syriac Maps update, as that is their most reliable source. Then we move on to the northern parts, where here we see some fighting west of Kovalivka. This is across the Serebetsreva area, southeast of Novojelivka. The Russian forces managed to advance slightly ahead of their held positions, trying to push onwards to the forest lines here to the south of Novojelivka and contesting the Ukrainian positions in the area. Other news, we have the first confirmed proof that Surovikin is still alive and is no longer, if at all, held under Russian captivity. Surovikin is the Russian Air Force general, former Air Force general, as he was fired recently, and he was said that he had no contact with his family and that he was isolated and many other things. But now we have a picture of him with his wife, and he is rolling the drip. So it seems that there is no indication that he has any issues. Most likely he's just on vacation. Just kidding. Who knows what is up? But at the very least, we know that he is alive and he could potentially return unless he has been removed permanently from his duty. But that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.